Once upon a time, you think you know, in the glittering kingdom of Ethoria, where the rivers ran silver and the mountains hummed ancient lullabies, there lived a princess so radiant that even the moon dimmed with envy when she stepped outside at night. Her name was Seraphina. She had golden hair that caught the wind like silk ribbons, eyes the color of summer storms, gray and blue and occasionally violet, and a laugh so warm it could melt frost off winter roses. Every nobleman, every prince from distant lands, every traveling merchant who passed through the kingdom's iron gates whispered the same thing. Princess Seraphina is the most beautiful soul in all the known world. But beauty, as Seraphina had learned long ago, was not a gift. It was a trap. The kingdom of Ethoria sat on a terrible secret, buried so deep that even the palace walls seemed to lean inward when someone whispered about it. Beneath the royal throne room, past the stone steps that only the king could descend, there lived something ancient and hungry. The servants called it the Hollow. No one spoke of it above a whisper. No one dared. Every 10 years, the Hollow required a price. A life. A royal life. And the 10th year had finally arrived. Seraphina discovered this truth not from her father, the king, nor from her mother, whose eyes had been wet with unshed tears for the past 3 months. She discovered it the way she discovered most dangerous things, by listening at the wrong door at the wrong time. She was 17 years old, barefoot on cold marble, pressing her ear against the thick oak door of her father's war council chamber, when she heard the words that changed everything. "The Hollow is waking," said the royal advisor, his voice shaking like a dried leaf. "It demands the eldest royal child. If we do not offer the sacrifice by the blood moon, 7 days from now, it will rise and consume the entire kingdom." Silence. Then her father's voice, broken and barely recognizable. "Then, we have no choice." Seraphina pulled back from the door. She was the eldest royal child. She was the sacrifice. She could have screamed. She could have run. She could have begged. Instead, Seraphina did something far more dangerous. She made a plan. At midnight, while the palace slept, she slipped out through the kitchen garden, past the sleeping guards, through the stone wall's hidden crack that only she and her childhood friend Alara had known about since they were 8 years old. She ran barefoot across the cold grass until the kingdom's lights faded behind her and the silver forest swallowed her whole. The silver forest was not a place for princesses. It was not a place for anyone with good sense. The trees here were ancient and their bark glowed faintly in the moonlight, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Strange flowers bloomed at midnight only to close at dawn, their petals humming with forgotten magic. Creatures with too many eyes watched from the darkness between branches, silent and unblinking. And deep within the forest, at the base of a tree so old it had forgotten its own name, lived the witch called Morrigan Vial. Seraphina had heard of her. Everyone had. Morrigan Vial had lived for 300 years by trading in the most precious currency in the world, not gold, not jewels, not kingdoms. She traded in pieces of people's souls. A memory here, a heartbeat there, a voice stolen sweetly, a laugh taken gently, a shadow peeled away like old paint. She gave, and she took, and what she took, she kept forever. Seraphina found the witch sitting beside a fire that burned violet instead of orange, stirring something thick and dark in an iron pot that smelled of old rain and forgotten prayers. Morrigan Vial looked up. She was not what Seraphina had expected. She was young. Terrifyingly, impossibly young, with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that held 3 centuries of watching the world hurt itself. She smiled slowly, like a cat watching a mouse convince itself it's brave. "A princess," she said, her voice like velvet wrapped around a blade. "How refreshingly foolish. What do you want, little royal?" Seraphina lifted her chin. "I want to save my kingdom. Everyone does." Morrigan stirred her pot. "The real question is, what are you willing to pay?" "I need to stop the Hollow," Seraphina said, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "It wants a royal life. I need a way to give it something, anything, that isn't a life." Morrigan was quiet for a long moment. Then she set down her stirring spoon, stood slowly, and walked around the fire until she was standing directly in front of Seraphina, studying her the way a jeweler studies a gem, looking for the flaw. "The Hollow doesn't want a life," Morrigan said softly. "It wants an anchor, a royal connection to the living world that keeps it tethered to this plane. Without that anchor, it drifts back into the void on its own. Then give it an anchor that isn't a person. It must come from royalty." Morrigan tilted her head. "But it doesn't necessarily need to be your life, little princess. It could be your shadow." Seraphina blinked. "My shadow. Your shadow is part of you, your essence, your royal blood captured in darkness. It would satisfy the Hollow's hunger. It would give it an anchor without claiming your life. Morrigan smiled again, and this time the smile didn't reach her eyes at all. The question is whether you understand what losing your shadow truly means. Tell me. Morrigan began to circle her slowly, like a moon orbiting a dying star. Your shadow carries your truth. Without it, you will cast no darkness, but you will also feel no fear. You will feel no shame. No guilt. No doubt. She paused. But also, and listen carefully, Princess, you will feel no instinct. No warning when danger is near. No voice inside your chest that whispers, something is wrong. You will become, beautifully, terribly blind to evil. Even when it is standing right in front of you. The fire crackled between them. Do you still want to make this deal? Seraphina thought of her father's broken voice. She thought of the kingdom sleeping peacefully behind its walls, all those people who didn't know they were 7 days from being devoured. She thought of the little children she'd seen that morning in the market, chasing each other with flower crowns. Yes, she said. Then give me your hand. The pain was not what she expected. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't like a cut or a burn or a blow. It was like being unmade slowly from the feet upward. She watched, and she would never forget watching, as her shadow peeled away from her feet like old silk, darkening and deepening and lifting, rising into Morrigan's outstretched hands like smoke. It wreathed briefly, as if it knew it was being taken. As if it was afraid. And then it was gone. Seraphina stood in the violet firelight and cast no shadow at all. She waited for grief. She waited for that hollow ache of loss. Nothing came. She felt light. Strangely, disturbingly, wonderfully light. Take this, Morrigan said, pressing a small black vial into her palm. 3 drops into the hollow's core chamber. It will carry your shadow essence. The hollow will accept it. Your kingdom will be safe. Seraphina closed her fingers around the vial. Thank you, she said. Morrigan said nothing. She only watched, with those 300-year-old eyes, as Seraphina turned and walked back through the silver forest. And for the first time in 300 years, the witch felt something she had almost forgotten. Pity. 6 days passed. Seraphina told no one what she had done. She smiled at the dinner table. She laughed with the court ladies. She held her mother's hand and felt nothing strange, no guilt about her secret, no fear about what came next. That was the shadow's absence working on her already. She noticed small things that should have alarmed her. A guard who watched her too carefully. A servant who appeared in rooms she hadn't expected. A new face in the court, a handsome young man named Selim, introduced as an ambassador from the Northern Territories, whose smile was slightly too wide and whose eyes reflected firelight in a way that human eyes didn't quite do. The old Seraphina, the one with a shadow, would have felt the wrongness of him immediately. This Seraphina smiled back and thought nothing of it. On the 7th night, the blood moon rising red and enormous over Ethoria's silver peaks, Seraphina descended the forbidden stone steps beneath the throne room alone, the black vial clutched in her hand, her single candle throwing a circle of gold light into the absolute darkness. The hollow was awake. She could feel it before she saw it, a presence so vast and so hungry it pressed against her from all sides like deep water. The air smelled of old stone and something older than stone. And at the center of the chamber, pulsing with slow, terrible energy, was a crack in the earth no wider than her hand but deep as forever, black light leaking from it in threads, reaching toward her like fingers. Seraphina did not hesitate. She uncorked the vial with her teeth, held it over the crack, and let 3 drops of midnight fall. The effect was immediate. The hollow screamed, not in defeat, but in recognition. In relief. The black light threads retracted. The pulsing slowed. The hungry presence folded in on itself, satisfied, sinking back into whatever depth had birthed it, the shadow anchor holding it like a chain. And then it was still. Seraphina let out a long breath. She had done it. The kingdom was safe. She turned to leave. And standing at the foot of the stone steps, blocking her exit, was Selim, the ambassador with the too wide smile and the wrong eyes. Only he wasn't smiling now. His form was shifting, the handsome exterior rippling like a reflection in disturbed water, until what stood before her was something ancient and angular, cloaked in darkness so deep it seemed to absorb the candle's light. You were very brave, little princess, it said, with a voice that was Selim's voice and also not at all Selim's voice. Sealing the hollow was clever. But you see, I am not the hollow. I am the one who feeds the hollow. And you have just locked away my food source. Who are you? Seraphina asked. The thing tilted its head. I am what comes after. I have been walking your kingdom for 6 days, wearing this face, waiting for the right moment. It stepped closer. Do you know what I find most delicious? Not fear, not despair, those are common. What I love most is trust. Innocent, blind, beautiful trust. It looked at her with something like admiration. And you, my dear shadowless princess, you are absolutely full of it. The candle flickered. Seraphina understood in an instant what Morrigan had tried to warn her about, the voice inside your chest that whispers, something is wrong, the instinct she no longer had. She had walked past this creature for 6 days without knowing. Her hand was empty. She had used the last of Morrigan's gift. She was alone underground with a monster, in the dark. And she had no shadow to warn her, no instinct to protect her, and no fear to make her run. But she had something the creature hadn't accounted for. She had her mind. And she had 6 days of watching it carefully, even without knowing why, storing every detail in her memory like a map she hadn't known she was drawing. You need trust to feed, she said slowly. Which means you cannot take by force. You can only take what's freely given. The creature paused. Its too wide smile returned, but slower this time. You are smarter than you look, princess. And you, Seraphina said, taking one careful step backward toward the far wall where she had noticed, 6 days ago, on a midnight walk she hadn't been able to explain even to herself, a second door, thin as a seam, carved into the stone and sealed with old royal wax, have been in my kingdom for 6 days thinking I was blind. She pressed her palm flat against the wax seal. Royal blood was the key. The door cracked open. Beyond it, sunlight. An ancient escape tunnel built by a long-dead queen who had also, perhaps, once faced something that wore human faces in the dark. Seraphina ran. She went back to Morrigan Vielle. Not to beg, not to bargain. She went back to tell her what had happened, every detail, every moment, every choice. And when she finished, Morrigan was quiet for a very long time. You survived without your instincts, the witch said finally, because you had already been paying attention before I took them. Yes, Seraphina said, but I don't want to live without them. Can you give it back? Shadows that have been given cannot simply be returned, Morrigan said. But a shadow can be grown back. It takes time. It takes truth. And it will never be exactly what it was, it will be something older and wiser and darker at the edges. How long? A year. Seraphina nodded. Then I'll wait. And she did. She went home and told her father everything, about the hollow, about her deal, about the creature wearing Selim's face that had slipped away through the tunnel's far end and might still be walking somewhere in the wide world, wearing some other borrowed face. She stood in the throne room and for the first time cast no shadow on the marble floor. But she stood tall, and she kept paying attention. She watched carefully. She listened at every door. She noticed the small things, the too wide smiles, the eyes that reflected fire strangely, the hands that didn't quite gesture the way human hands do. She became, over that year, the most observant person in all of Ethoria. And when the year ended, and she stepped outside on a bright morning and looked down at the ground and saw, thin as paper, dark as midnight, sharp at the edges, her shadow returning, she smiled. Not because it meant she was whole again, but because she had learned, in its absence, that courage does not live in your instincts. It lives in your choices. And hers had never wavered. The kingdom of Ethoria prospered. The hollow stayed sealed. And Princess Seraphina, with her new shadow, darker and wiser than before, became the greatest queen her kingdom had ever known. She never stopped watching for too wide smiles. She never stopped listening at wrong doors. And she never, ever stopped paying attention. The end.